The greatest thing about Tokusatsu, the Henshin, or transformation if you ain't Nihongo Jozu enough. The most iconic thing in the franchise that everyone who watches it can maybe agree, without the roll call of either calling out the names of the hero like Ultraman, or the iconic Henshin like Kamen Rider, or whatever Super Sentai does, because don't hate me, I don't know much about Sentai. The first series that I'm watching is literally Boon Boonja. Anyone from the respective fan base of those franchises can agree that those elements of transformations that the Toku heroes use are one of the things that we all remember the most. To some of us, especially these days, we may think to ourselves, I remember back in the day when Ultraman would only scream the name without needing all these toys. I remember back in the day when Kamen Rider wasn't about all these toys and all they did was hand gestures and said Henshin. I remember back in the day when Super Sentai had this and that. I remember back in the day when all this had. Yeah, I think you can understand what this video will be about. So how long should Tokusatsu Henshins really last? 1 second? One big segment? 24 minutes? I don't know. If I were to make one big answer that would make this video completely redundant, I would say it depends on the execution. Why is that, you ask? Well, if it is executed like Ultraman Zero Beyond Transformation, where he takes his sweet time to organize his capsules from 4 to 2 and then finally transform, then I would say that that is just way too damn long. I mean, couldn't Hikari have organized it for him before going to Earth? Yeah, anyway. But if it is executed like with Bakuage Sentai Boon Boonja, where each moment feels like they get straight to the point of transformation and they get their poses out of the way, then I would say that that is nicely done. They even sometimes make fun of themselves for how long it takes. So for me, it really depends. I mean, I'm not too fussed about it, but for the sake of this video, I need to make some content, so I gotta drag this out somehow. So to explain how long the Henshins should last, I'm going to break it down to 3 segments. It's gonna be a comparison, with the first one being the Showa Era, the second one the Heisei and Reiwa Era, and the third one a conclusion. I'm only gonna be basing it off of the 3 main Toku shows, Ultraman, Kamen Rider, and Sentai, because if I try to cover everything, then I'll just be wasting a lot of time. So I'm going to be comparing the 3 eras of the main Toku shows and see how long should the Henshins last. So, Showa Era. Now, as we already know, Showa Era has one of the fastest transformation sequences compared to the rest of the eras. I mean, if you've been in the Toku space for maybe not even a few weeks, then you should know that this is pretty much common knowledge. This is especially obvious with the first releases of each series, where none of the series at some point had long catchphrases, but instead transformed straight away without saying a single word, such as Ultraman pressing a button, Kamen Rider riding with the wind, and Himitsu Sentai, well, they just showed up with no real explanation as to how they transformed. But simple nonetheless. Nothing complicated such as gimmicks with toys or long transformation sequences. Just straight to the point. Except there are some exceptions to this, especially with Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. To make things clear before giving my explanation, I haven't seen much Sentai. I've only seen the first episodes of Himitsu Sentai, Kyoru Zyuranger, and Gokaiger, and currently keeping up with Boon Boonja. But I can tell that the difference between Himitsu Sentai and Kyoru Zyuranger is pretty big. I already noticed straight away that Kyoru Zyuranger has already become more focused on transformation gimmicks, especially the use of the transformation device. Although it is technically straightforward, but the fact that it is way more evident compared to Himitsu Sentai, which didn't even have any at all. So that should mean that within this era of Sentai, the franchise had already morphed, get it, into a new style of gimmicks that brings in the ideas of the importance that the transformations have on the Toku TV shows. But keep in mind, I haven't seen either of these series completely. I'm only making a judgment based on the first episodes of the 2 series. I'm sure that anything else in between would be a similar case of the franchise seeing the eventual change and providing more on the transformations. But since I'm only basing off of the first episodes of the 2 series, I can't really do much comparisons, so I'll leave it up to the viewers to do that. But in saying that, I have another franchise that I can make a decent comparison. Kamen Rider. Now, I have seen a handful of episodes from Kamen Rider Ichigo, mostly episode 1, 2, and the Chameleon episode, but I'm also completely aware that for the rest of the 90 episodes, we do see that eventually the riding with the wind transformation had turned into something that was more, the use of poses. From what I could understand, this was only used because the actor of Ichigo was involved in an accident that saw him leave production, so they replaced him with a second Kamen Rider, in which the actor wasn't actually able to ride a motorbike. So to substitute the use of the riding with the wind, they ended up with just the actor using hand movements and began the iconic catchphrase of Henshin. But don't take my word for it, I didn't do any research for this part. Lol. I just heard this from the internet somewhere. But go fact check it yourself if you want to know the reason. So already, within one series, the straightforward approach of transforming had turned into a new gimmick of hand gestures and a belt that no longer needed the wind to power its transformation. Now this is also more evident with Kamen Rider Black and Black RX, where the hand gestures are the main element of showing us the gimmick of transformation, and the usage of the belt is used where there is no need for any other external factors but the movement of the hands and the use of the word Henshin. So eventually Kamen Rider had also become a show that relied on a different type of gimmick that was used for transformation. As for Ultraman, well, they pretty much stayed the same except for Ultraman Ace, Ultraman Taro, Ultraman Leo, and Ultraman 80. But the gimmick did have extra hand movements, but it wasn't as in your face as Kamen Rider. I mean, sure, the Ultra shows mentioned had the movements, but the time it takes for them to transform is still less than the time it took for the riders mentioned to transform. So in my point of view, Showa Era Ultraman was probably the only series at the time to have the most straightforward transformation without the need to drag it out or make it obvious with adding toys to the mix. I mean, Return of Ultraman didn't even have a transformation device, he just raised his hand. But to summarize all of this, for the Showa Era Toku shows, the transformation began as a very straightforward approach without the need to overly emphasize the use of needing toys or any other factors that contribute to the transformation sequence. But there are some exceptions to this, especially when the series develops later on. Each series begins to incorporate more usage of gimmicks into the transformation sequences. However, it still is pretty straightforward. Until Heisei and Reiwa Era. The reason why I decided not to separate the two is because this will become a long ass video, and well, it also pretty much works the same as the Showa Era, so might as well talk about both eras for one segment of this video. So as we all know, the transformation sequences gets longer and longer and more toy centric as each series ages to the next. I'm pretty sure this is all common knowledge now. I don't think there is much for me to cover with how the changes have been applied to these Toku shows during these eras, so I guess to get straight to the point, with these era of Toku, it just gradually becomes longer and more toy centric. No further examination needed. It basically followed Showa Era in a way. Tiga and Kuga had straightforward transformations, and then the franchises start to play a bigger emphasis on showing us the transformation sequences and the toys. While Ultraman did still have transformation sequences that were straightforward for most of the Heisei era, it eventually got to the point where more emphasis was needed for the transformations. Same with Kamen Rider. Although Kamen Rider had started making it more obvious much earlier than Ultraman, and I guess they have kept up with the emphasis on the transformation and the toys for the most part of Heisei and Reiwa Era. As for Super Sentai, well, the only thing I know about Heisei Sentai is episode 1 of Go Kaiga and that one episode of Go Onga and Boom Bunja, and judging it based on that, it seemed like they haven't really done much to change anything, and the emphasis of transformations and toys has pretty much stayed consistent. But I don't know much about Sentai, so I guess you guys can let me know on more details about that. So with each era sort of explained, I guess we get to the big question. Do we need long transformations? To go back to the very beginning with what I had said, it all depends on the execution, how well they have made to make it a part of the story, rather than how much it is forced into our faces and clearly advertising for toy sales. And I do admit that times now have changed. These shows have also adapted to the times, and the people who were once kids that have grown up with the early Heisei and Showa era would be reminiscing of what they had grown up watching. I remember having moments of my life of when I was a kid screaming Tiga and starting fights with other school kids because I wanted to be Ultraman. Not the best way of learning from the message of Ultraman, which then eventually leads to now, with me getting more into Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. I have my moments of doing things that would be reminiscing of my child self screaming Tiga, for example saying Henshin as I crack my fingers to try and mimic Keiwa-sama. But of course, I don't do that every day, and I obviously don't do that in front of people, so I guess guess with that in mind, people remember the transformations the most. In most of my interactions with Toku fans, the one thing that they'll mimic the most about the certain Toku character that they follow is the transformations. And I guess with the more emphasis that a show has on the transformation, the more the people will remember it. Alright, you can't deny that people will be mimicking Gottschalk's transformation pose right now, even if it takes a while. And the fact that no villain decides to attack while he's casually doing his sequence poses, it won't deny us the ability to be inspired by the poses and to follow it, which also applies with any other Toku hero. Even if there are people out there that are more of a fan of the suit of the character that has transformed, there's no denying that they'll mimic the poses of the transformation as well, because the transformations is what makes the character be that character. It is what makes the character stand out from the rest, giving us the flair, adding to their personalities, making us remember the transformations that represents the character, such as with Kuga. The simplicity within his transformation makes it distinguishable. It reflects on what he was, what the show was, and makes us remember everything about Kuga, as the character of Godai Yusuke wasn't a person that was flashy or a person full of personality. He was a very grounded, down-to-earth character, someone who brings a smile in a situation that was bad, a person that reassures everyone that things will be okay, and the fact that his personality was down-to-earth. It reflects on what his transformation sequence is like. Something that is grounded, something that is straightforward, nothing that is too fancy or bold or brash. In other words, his transformation sequence reflects the style of what makes Godai Yusuke Godai Yusuke. It doesn't need anything more to make the transformation or make him stand out, and it doesn't need anything less. His transformation reflects his personality. It is something that makes him who he is, and is something that people can distinguish and cherish the most. It's the transformation that makes people know that it is Kamen Rider Kuga and no one else. Yeah, that got deep. So I guess essentially, as I have stated, it all depends on the execution. It needs to be something that makes the character and the show memorable. I don't think it needs to be long or it needs to be short. I believe, in my opinion, it just needs to be memorable. Cause hey, Ultraman Zero Beyond transformation took one hell of a long time for him to transform, but I guess it reflects on Zero being someone that was a showboat and loved the attention and had one hell of a cocky personality. So I guess his transformation sequence for Zero Beyond justifies that. And that even though it is completely ridiculous, I still remember that sequence very well. Meaning that no matter how ridiculous it could be, as long as people remember it, then it is a complete success. I guess that makes sense. So that answers it. We don't care if it takes too long or if it is too short. Just make it as whack as possible. And if you can get people talking about it and wanting to mimic the transformation sequences, then you've hit home run. No further explanation needed. It's just that simple. So I guess to summarize all of this, the transformation sequence is the one thing that reflects on what makes the characters be the characters. And the evolution of the henshin becoming longer and more bombastic is a way of drawing more emphasis on the importance that it plays in depicting the characters becoming the hero. It needed to change. It was needed to give us new memories of the franchises and new identities for the new characters. However, there are arguments against this. I'm not going to deny that. I know most people are going to say that, oh, Garo had always used the same transformation, or oh, Ultraman had always had basic transformation for a very long time until the new generation. Yeah, I know, but the majority of the other Toku shows have evolved to use more than what the basic transformations are. And with that in mind, it should be proof that because of it, it's the reason that it needs to be different, as explained already. So do we need long transformation sequences in Toku? Up to you guys. If it was my opinion, I would say just make it work. Incorporate it into the story, make it work well with the characters. That's what I care about. I'm sure most of you guys have your opinions of this, so feel free to make some comments down below. That's it. That's the video. As long as it's memorable, then that's good enough. Bye.